think I moved next door to a witch. I recently bought a house in the country, and my only neighbor is a woman in her 50s. She lives about 2 miles up the road, and though we've never officially met, I see her outside all the time. She's usually in her garden when I drive by. And she always seemed like a harmless old lady. I didn't think anything was off about her at all until the last full moon. It was a weekend, so I was up late, smoking and stargazing on my back porch, when I noticed roughly a dozen bobbing lights down the road. I didn't know who it could be, so I quietly ducked inside and watched a group of people pass by. They were chanting something that I couldn't understand. It may have been another language, and all of the voices sounded distinctly female. On top of that, each person was carrying a gas lantern, and they were all wearing black hooded robes. Despite anything else, it's too hot for that during this time of year. It was too dark to make out their faces, but the one in the lead had the same hunched over stride as my neighbor. There's no mistaking that waddle. I watched the group until they were out of sight and made a pot of coffee. I didn't feel like sleeping now that I knew those people were out there. Whatever they were doing, it didn't feel innocent, and that was soon proven by a distant scream. I couldn't even tell if it was human or animal, but thankfully it was the only one. An hour later, I saw the bobbing lights return, and I watched as the robed figures passed by once more, in silence this time. I wanted to know what they were doing, but I was too afraid to traipse through the dark forest alone, so I waited until morning. Then I followed the road about half a mile down until I noticed a small trail to my right. It was still muddy from the last rain, so it was easy to follow their footprints along the way. I almost turned around after about 30 minutes, and part of me wishes I had, but at least this way, I know to be wary around my neighbor and her, friends. After another 15 minutes on the ever-narrowing trail, I came to a small clearing. In the center were the remnants of a campfire and a large boulder that was seemingly used as a makeshift table. It was stained with something I assumed to be blood, hopefully from a chicken, judging by all the feathers scattered about. I guess it could have been a chicken scream that I heard the previous night, but there's always the chance that my mind just wants to think that. As more time passes, my memories fade, and I begin to replace them with less terrifying possibilities. There were also several piles of rocks stacked up around the clearing perimeter, and bundles of small sticks tied together with twine. I don't know what any of that means, but I've seen similar items in various documentaries related to witchcraft. I really don't know what I should do next. Should I do anything? I considered calling the police, but what would I say? And what would happen if they confronted my neighbor? I'm the only other person who lives on this road. There would be no denying that I was the one to report her. Regardless of anything else, it feels reckless to piss off a potential witch. So far, she's never bothered me, and I'd like to keep it that way. The only thing I know for certain is that I'm going to keep my cats inside at night, especially during a full moon. I'm a social worker and counselor in Michigan. I've worked in the youth department for the past decade. The stories most of these kids have could fill pages alone, but we're talking about witches. Yes, witches. I want to preface this by saying and emphasizing that when I say I can rock a mean poker face, I mean it. I secretly pride myself on keeping my face and body calm when I'm approached in a frantic manner. At work, nobody's seen me break. I don't believe the workplace is where you should bring your home issues. As is the same when they say, don't bring your work home with you. Although, if I was asked this question on a company survey, I'd say that you should feel comfortable to express your emotions at work. Because I know this is a personal bias of mine, one that I shouldn't expect from others. So, long story short, I don't let others affect my day. Whatever's going on in my life, whatever kind of morning I've had, when I get to work, it's like stepping into another dimension. One with distractions and threads to their own stories, unattached from the ones at home. In May, a new girl started working in our office. We'll call her Annie. She's nice on all accounts, and I don't believe what she's doing is intended to be scary. Between you and me, she gives off a very interesting vibe, possibly on the spectrum. She's very honest with the things she says, like telling a coworker that she liked the way his hair looked before he cut it. She wears cat ear headphones when the atmosphere gets too loud around her, that kind of stuff. But those aren't the things I'm referring to when I say scary. Those are by all means super normal behaviors that I've seen a million times. Again, this is about witches. A few weeks ago, my wife and I had gotten into a pretty big argument the night before that lasted into the morning. But when I got to work, I was pleasant, and I acted with the same work attitude I do on all other days. I was actually leaned over the front desk, making our little old secretary laugh, as I do, when Annie walks in the front doors. I turn around and I tell her, "Good morning," rather jovial, and she says, "Oh, you're feeling rough today, huh?" I'm like, "What? No, it's a great day." And she just looks at me for a little too long, then continues in the direction she'd been walking. I remember the secretary looking at me, confused. We shared a smile and sort of shrugged our shoulders, and I carried on with my day. But it really threw me off. I reflected all day on how my demeanor could have changed enough for her to say that. Then last week, and I know this sounds so silly, but my goldfish died. She was part of my family for the last 10 years. We'd just replaced her tank with a bigger one. We think the stress of the change was too much. Honestly, it was heartbreaking. I still tear up when I spend too much time thinking about it. The day I returned to work, Annie walks up to me and says, "I'm so sorry for your loss." I was so caught off guard, emotionally fragile, that I didn't even deflect or deny how I was feeling. Her statement brought tears to my eyes. All I could say was, "Thank you." Before that, I'd been fine, but after that, I walked to my car, called my boss, and faked an illness so I could just leave that day. It was like she pulled and unearthed the emotion I'd buried. Was the veil of my poker face thinner than I imagined it? Had the others around me also noticed but chose not to speak of it? The next day, feeling overwhelmed with curiosity, I asked Annie how she knew. How did she know how I was feeling? What had happened? I wasn't prepared for her response. Annie tells me that she can see things, people's energy, events. She says that she can't help it. It's like a magic power that she's had since she was a baby. Like auras, I ask her. She tells me, yes, but it's more. She says that she goes beyond linking colors to emotions. That she can also sense what's happened or is happening to someone. Like a psychic or a telepath? I didn't say this one out loud, but she answers me without skipping a beat. Sort of like a psychic or telepathy, sure. I knew you'd had a fight with your wife because your thoughts were really heavily focused on resolving that. You were really beating yourself up about the fact that you hadn't already done that, right? She looks at me for confirmation, and though dumbfounded, I manage to shake my head, signaling, yes, you're eerily correct. Then she continues, saying that her mom had it too, but that she didn't actively practice witchcraft like her mother and grandmother. Her response threw me for such a loop that I just said, "Oh, cool." And then it was back to whatever she'd come to ask me about. So maybe this is silly. I don't know how to feel about this. It feels like it's on the verge of being intrusive, violation of privacy somehow. But I obviously can't go to HR with a complaint about a coworker reading my thoughts. With an email like that, I'd be pulled into the office way before she was. Then, the more I think about the field of work we're in, the more I can't help but feel like Annie might be a real asset. So conflicted, truly. So please, any advice would be greatly appreciated. What do I do, if anything, about Annie?